Today's daf is daf Yud Beis, and we'll begin on daf Yud Aleph on Yud Beis, counting up from the bottom of the Amud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines up from the bottom. Boy Rami Bar Chama. Harei alai kivsar zivchei shlomim li'achar zrikas domim mau. He takes upon himself an Isur Neder on a kikar with hatpasa. Hatpasa means when he extends the status of one object onto the other object. The first object is Asur, it's already Asur, that's called object A, and he extends that status of Isur onto object B through hatfasa. That's a neder hatfasa. In this case, the object A is actually mutter. It's not also. Why? Because we're talking about shlomim after zrika. Shall we say that since he takes upon himself there's no valid neder here because he's being makbis on a davar mutter after zrika sadam. Basar shlomim is mutter b'achila. Part of it will be by the kohanim, part by the bailim. So he's being makbis on basar shlomim after zrika. That's a davar hetera. And the pasuk says in Parashas Re'eh v'dam tzvachecha yishapech v'basar tochel. After the dam is already subject to zrika, then you eat the basar. So for sure, this hatfasa should not be meaningful. So the Gemara asks, what then is Rami Bar Chama vacillating about? It's crystal clear that he's being makbis by hetera, not by surah. There's no havamina that this neder would be chal. Ella, says the Gemara, we have to change a little bit. And the suffix of Rami Bar Chama is in the following case: Kigon de machis basar zivchei shlavim umachis de hetera gabe. He has two pieces of basar in front of him. I'm sorry. He has a piece of basar zivchei shlam lachar zrik in front of him, and he has this kikar, this loaf of bread that's heter. These are the two objects that are lying on the table in front of him. The Omar Zekazeh. And he says, let this lechem, this kikar, be like this basar. What was the suffix of Rami Bar Chama? So again, it wasn't an abstract statement in Luftarain, in which he says that this kikar should be like basar, zivchei shlom lachar zrika, that's for sure Zetera, but rather were the two objects in front of him. Object A is basar, object B is lechem. Object A once was asur b'kodshim as shlomim before zrika. My, shall we say, be karo kamatis. These are the key words that'll take us through the next daf, through daf Yud Beis. Be karo kamatis. What he means to say is that he's talking about the ikar Isur that once existed, Meikara, beforehand, meaning before the Zrika, on this basar. Or should we look at the basar as it is right now? And after Zrika, of course, the shlom is mutter b'achila, and therefore there's no hatfasa. It's a hatfasa in the davar mutter, not in the davar asur. And this is what the Gemara is going to embark upon an investigation as to whether or not we can apply the principle of meikara kamatis. Oh, Rava Toshma, I'm going to be poshet this suffix from our Mishnah, and the Mishnah tells us that a person could generate an Isur on himself on a kikar by being matvisid with the words harei alai nosar upigul. Now, nosar upigul once were kodshim, and they were a davar nadur, but now they became a davar asur. Nosar liachas man achilaso, and pigul with the machshava shelo lishma. And now we start the daf for today. So Rava analyzes this on daf Yud Beis. Vaha. Second. On daf Yud Beis Omen Aleph, but no saru pigul li achar zrikas damimu. How could he possibly be matvis something and generated an Isra Achil on a kikar by being matvis in no sar pigul? No sar pigul is chal after there was a heter achila, after zrikas domin. Right, Nosar went through a period of heter achila, now it became aser. It was, let's say, Kochim Kochim, it was after the night and the day, and in the case of Kochim Kalim, 2 days and 1 night, and so forth and so on. Pigul is again after they were makriv everything. There was Rikas Adam, and every single segment of avoda was done on this carbon, culminating with Zrika. And the machshava was a machshava's pigul. So it's impossible now to establish a valid neder based on atfas of the Isser Nosar Pigul. That's a davar asur. The Isser of Nosar or the Isser of Pigul does not emerge as a result of his neder, of his haflas peh, but rather it results from the fact that the basar carbon passed its allotted time for achila, or because of a machshava shelo lishma, of chutzim zmano, chutzim koma, whatever it might be. So there's the only way that we could possibly justify the validity of this neder and this atfas and pigul and nosar would only make sense if we apply the principle of made karaka matis. Namely, that we go back to the status of this basar before Zrikas Adam. And now we can be poshet the suffix of Rami Bar Chama, that indeed, with regard to Atfasa, we apply the principle made karaka matlis. Amalei Rav Huna Berei de Rav Nasan L'Rava. This is not a proof from our Mishnah. That's not valid. I can simply reject your proof and say that the Tana, when it says benosar asur, is benosar shal ola. He's specifically referring to a carbon ola. And he said it explicitly. He says the nosar of an ola should be, my kikar should be like the nosar of an ola. Now, a carbon ola, no change in the status of the kodesh is generated by the Zrikas Adam. Because to the same extent that before Zrika, it was also Mishum Kodesh, and that means a Dover Hanodur, because he was Magdish, the animal. So to after Zrika, the same status persists because Zrika is not Matir Nosar. I'm sorry, Zrika is not Matir Ola. Ola is Kulo Kola with his Beach, and Zrika is not Matir Achila. So the original status of Isra Achila by virtue of the Hegdesh, meaning the Davar Nadur, that still continues. And now we have an Isra that exists by virtue of the original Neder, because Zrikas Adam is not Matir the Achila in the case of Ola. But in a case of something which, although it was originally a Davar Hanadur because of the Shem Kodesh, but after Zrika, the Zrika is Matir the Basar Bachila, and right now it's in a state of Heter, that's not Atfasa B'Davar also, that's Atfasa B'Davar Mutter. So this is the Achra of Rav Huna. Amalei, so Rava responds to Rav Huna with a kash. He says, if you tell me that the Mishnah is talking about a case of Ola, listening, it should have said B'Psar Ola. Why does the Tana bring this example of Atfasa, where he's marked this B'Basar Ola, without mentioning the fact that it's Ola? the emphasis of our Mishnah is on the fact that there's a psul nosar, there's a psul pigul. The Mishnah should have dropped the ball on nosar and pigul, leave that out, and just tell me this would have been a primary example of atfasa, which would generate a valid neder in basar ola, regardless of whether or not it was nosar or pigul. You're telling me, Rav Huna, that the thrust of the Mishnah is a carbon ola liachar zrikas adam. Well, if it's ola liachar zrikas adam and atfasa is chal, because of the fact that the zrikas namat to the basar remains asumi din hegdesh as a davar nodur, then why confuse us with introducing pigul and nosa? And Rav Huna answers Rava's contention by saying lo mi boy kama, that the Mishnah should be read in a lo mi boy situation. It goes without saying. Lo mi boy goes without saying that Basar Ola, the Asur, the Neder is Chal, and it generates an Isra on the Kikar, because in the case of Matfis Basar Ola, it remains in the status of Hegdish, as far as the Isra Achilas Habasa. Even after the Zrika has no impact. The Mati, the Basar, the Ha, the carbon Kamatfis, right? The Ola remains in the full-fledged status of carbon as a Dover Nadur, even after Zrika. Ella, but the Mishnah wants to go even beyond that and tell us that even in Nosar and Pigul the Ola, it's true. And there's a big chiddush here in the case of someone who is matfis his kikar, his neder, in a carbon Ola liachar Nosar Pigul, after it became Nosar, or in the case where it became Pigul. What was the Havamina? Why would I think otherwise? Salkid, I would have thought that if he's being matfis benoser pigul, it's as if he said explicitly, ki iser nosar ki iser pigul, that he wants his kikar to be asur in the same way that nosar pigul is asur. Then it's matfis bedover asur, because as we said before, what generates the iser after nosar and pigul? It's not the original Hagdasha, but it's the fact that it passed a certain allotted time, or the fact that he had the wrong machshava. V'lo mitzvah, therefore the nether cannot be chal. Kamash v'lo, no. His intention is not for the Isur Nosar, but for the Isur Kodesh in this Basar Nosar and Pigul. And basically what happens here is we have some object in front of us, which is this Basar Ola after it became Nosar Pigul, which is Asur under two different categories, one of which is a Davar Nadur and the other is a Davar Asur. And therefore you can match up his Hatfasa in one of two ways. Is he being matfis in the Davar Asur, therefore the Neder is not Chal, or alternatively is he being matfis in the Davar Nadur and the Neder is Chal? Because in the case of Nosar of Ola, on the one hand, it has an Isur Kodesh, because as we said before, the Zrika Saddam has not changed anything by one iota, and then it's a Davar Nadur. Or should we say, no, now it has an additional Isur of an Isur Nosar, which is a Davar Asur, and therefore the Neder is not Chal, and we don't know whether that fuss is really meaningful. So we're going to interpret his intention that he wants to be matfis b'domer another in the shem kodesh of Ola. And that's the way Rav Huna will defend himself against the attack of Rav Mesvei. The Gemara now wants to be poshet the suffix of Ram Barachon from the following brisa, which will be a kasha on Rav Huna, who said that you don't have any proof to establish Meikara Kamatvis because we're talking about a case of an Ola. And the brisa says, Ezu Isur Ha'omer B'Torah. What is an Isur Neder? And the brisa is talking about a Neder al Yidei Atfasa, Omar, here's the example of the Brisa. Hareini, he declares, Harei Olai Shalo Ochal Basar, I won't eat today. V'shalo Eshte Yayin, I won't drink wine today. Ki Yom Shemeis Bo Oven, Ki Yom Shemeis Bo Rabo, O Ki Yom Shenerag Bo Gedalim Menachito, O Ki Yom Shereisi Yushalayim B'Churbanah. So this is called Hatbasas Yom B'Yom. He says that today should be Asur, B'Achilas Basar Shtiyas Yayin, like another day which is Asur. Which are the examples that the Brisa enumerates of a day that's Asur? Kiyom Shebesbo Aviv. And here we'll quote the Ramah, who writes in Yoredea Siman Tov Beis, Mitzvah lis anos Yom Shebesbo Aviv v'imo. This is not the Hasidic approach. This is the non-Hasidic approach, that on a yard site, he should be fasting. And Rabbi Kiva adds a comment extending the principle of Ramah to the day in which his Rebbe died. So in my case, I don't think that would apply because my Rebbe died on Yom Tov, where there's no time. Now, what's interesting here is that it's only a partial hatfasa in the sense that if with a full-fledged hatfasa based on the Ramah and Rabbi Kiva, then he should be also in achila and shasiya b'chlal. Here he only generates an isur of achilas basa and shtiyas yayin. But it be that as it may, certainly a day of tainus has within it an isur basa and isur yayin. Now he says he was matfisid on a tainus tzibur of Gedalia, Tzom Gedalia. And this is on the 3rd of Tishrei. Now there's a very interesting comment here, the Beis Yosef and Orachaim Siman Tov Kuf Mem Tes, according to which Gedalia actually died on Rosh Hashanah, not on the 3rd of Tishrei. They pushed off the Tainus to a weekday, meaning a day of Chol, as opposed to Rosh Hashanah, which is a day of Kodesh and has a mitzvah achil. But be that as it may, when he said Kiyom Shenerag Bo Gedalim and Achika, what he meant to say was on Gimel Tishrei or Tisha B'Av. Yom Sheraisi Yushalayim B'Churbanah. However, the Mishnah Berurah apparently understood that we're talking about the day in which a person saw, let's say, Yerushalayim b'Churbanah, or maybe the first time he saw Yerushalayim b'Churbanah. I don't know if you have anything in your commentary beyond that, Mishnah Berurah. I thought maybe he was referring to Tisha B'Av, but that doesn't seem to be the Mishnah Berurah. Omar Shmuel, v'hu nonu b'yoso hayom. In other words, he's being marked this day, today, onto a day which is also b'neder b'basar v'yayin. Hechi Dover, what's the case? Lav, isn't it the case of Kigon the Koi B'chad B'Shabbat, the Mispei Avur? So let's say on the first day of the week, on Sunday, actually, let me take that back. It's the first day of the month. It could be any day of the week. But on that first day of the month, let's say Aleph L'Chodesh Nisan, which is the yard site of his father, he accepted upon himself an Isur of Achilas Basan Shsias Yain. But he only did it on that particular day. What do I mean on that particular day? Let's say his father died last year. So a year later, on the anniversary of his father's death, let's call it Aleph L'Chodesh Nisan, he said that today should be like the day in which I took a neder. Yeah, so it probably wouldn't have been the first year, maybe it would be the second year, but last year I already took on a neder, and today, this year, likewise. But many years went by, and on the first day of the month of Nisan, years later, he wants to go back and create and recreate an Israel Atzmo, that this day should be like the original day in which he accepted upon himself, Aleph Chodesh Nisan, to abstain from basar and yain. So he says, Yehei Yom Zeh Alai Ki Yom Rishon Aleph L'Chodesh Nisan. So there were many years in between that passed by, and he was not knowing this Isur Neder. The Afagav Dika Tuva Chada B'Shabbat Detera, even though over the last 5 years he has not observed Aleph Nisan with an Isur Basar and Yain, nevertheless, we say he was matvis on the original first year, that day of Aleph Nisan 5 years ago. Uktani Osir, and it's a valid neder. Shmamino Meikaru matvis. You have to apply the principle Meikaru matvis to say that we're going back to a time period earlier in which that day was also beneder. Because again, if you're going to say that he was referring to the last couple of years of Aleph Nisan, those were all days of the Heter. So the neder would not be chal, he's being matvis in a davar hamuta. So we have no choice here in order to justify the conclusion of this brisa that it is a valid neder, and he's also the yain of the basar b'yain. It must be that we're going back meikara. And this, of course, is against Rav Huna, who came to the conclusion within the suffix of Rabbi Bar Chama that we don't apply the principle meikara, but rather it would support Rava's conclusion that we are matvis meikara. And the Gemara rejects it. When Shmuel made the statement that the Bryce is talking about Vahusha Nadar Oso Hayom, it means Shenadar Ubame Oso Hayom Velu, from that original day in which he took the neder that on his father's yard side he would be enjoined from eating meat and drinking wine. From that day and on, every year on the anniversary of his father's death, he was noed that Isur Neder. So there were never days of Heter in the 5-year period in between today and 5 years ago, and therefore that fasa is meaningful. So it doesn't mean that we're basing ourselves and operating with the principle of Meikara Kamatvis, because all these days of Yartzeit on an annual basis were always observed as days of Isur. So he's being matvis in a davar hanod, without activating the principle of Meikar Kamat. Now the Gemara wants to be poshet. Rami Bar Chama is suffix from another place. Amar Avinu Tashma. We have a Mishnah later on at Daf Yud Gimel and Beis. A person generated on himself an Isur of the food of his friend by being matvis b'davar asur min haTorah. For example, he says to his friend that whatever I'll eat for you should be like chalas Aaron. And chalas Aaron, which we call challah, was separated from a dough, and it was given to the Kohanim b'dei Aaron, and it's a davar ha'asur, right? Truma or challah is asur to a zar with an isur misa b'dei shamayim who can truma also. Is mutter. The neder is not chal. He's allowed to eat from his friend because he's being matfis on a davar asur min haTorah. And a neder is only chal when you're matfis in a davar another, not in a davar asur. Now, personally, I had trouble with this. Baruch Hashem, he asks the question. So wait, before I read this inside, let me just formulate my question. And that is, why is Truma a Davar Asur? What generates the Isa Truma? It's the Hafrasha. So when you point to the Truma and you say, this is Truma, you are creating an Isa Truma Lizarin. So that should make it a Davar Another, not a Davar Asur. But I'll tell you what I think the answer might be. We'll see inside in a second. That it's a Davar Asur because basically even before he sets it up as Truma, it was Tevel. So the Isa was inherent in the fact that it was Tevel from the moment that it was cut down from the field. Let's see what he says. Then he tells you to look in the Mefarshim. So just 1 second, maybe we'll see this. Let's just jump to the Ran for a second. 2 lines up before the end of the Amud. The Apal Gav the Kriya Shem Mitzare. Kevadeno Osur L'chol Dovra. Kevad She'eno Osur L'chol. So it's only Osur to Zarim. Dovra Osur Mikri below Dovra Another. What kind of an answer is that? 1 second. Let me just see if the Rosh. Sometimes the Rosh is simpler than the Ran. 4 lines up from the bottom of the Rosh. The Afagav the Mitzrali they piv. Lavi Dovra no Dovri Kora na. Baruch Hashem. You're going to tell me I cheated, right? He says the Hami Kora Nami who also Mishum Tevel. Upiv lo asar elahitir es hashirayim shahotzi hashirayim b'dei tevel. Beautiful, right? That's called chulin v'tevel mu'uravim zeh. Basically, before you mafresh truma, you have a mixture of tevel and heter, and what you do is you separate the heter from the tevel. Well, wait, no, let me. That's not exactly. 1 second. That's not such a great formulation. Let me say it this way. Before the Afrashas Truma, you have the entire entity is one entity of Tevel. Haraya, if you eat any part of it, you'll be Chai Frachilas Tevel. And now your Afrash is a Matir. Not exactly a Matir, it's a Matir for Kohanim, I should say. But basically, the Isa that was inherent inside the Isa remains and persists. So that's a Davar Asur. Really Tevel. So again, I don't understand the Ran's answer, but at least the Rosh is a lot simpler. So now the Gemara is Medayek from the language of the Mishnah on Yud Gimel and Beis. The Mishnah seems to imply that when you mat this, a neder, a kikar be'echala b'trumas muta, ha b'kitrumas lachmei toda also. So we have lachmei toda. When you bring a carbon toda, right? From lahodos. So then you bring 4 different categories of lechamim, of breads, 3 of which are matzah, 1 of which is chametz, and those are chalos, rekikin, urevucha, which we'll get into later on today, Mitzvah Hashem, and they're all matzah. So 10 lechamim for each of 3 categories, chalos, rekikin, urevucha, and that's 30 chalos that are matzah. Then he brings a sarah of chametz, and from each one of these 4 categories, he takes 1 kikar out of the 10, and he designates as truma for the kohen. That's called truma slachmei toda. So he's mafresh a challah times 4, and there's 1 from each of the 4 categories. Of those 40 chalos, the 4 categories of 10 each that are brought and accompany the carbon toda. And in this case, the implication, says Ravina of the Mishnah, is that the neder would be chal. Because Trumas Lachmei Toda is considered a davar nodu. and therefore it lends itself to Atfasa, and the neder is Chal. And now the Gemara is going to analyze this on Daf Yud Beis, Omid Beis.